my question is to Christopher is how you can justify wanting to take something away from people, from 95, that gives meaning to 95% of the American people, and replace it with something that gives meaning to just 5% of the American people?
Ha! Well, what an incredibly stupid question. First, I've said repeatedly that this stuff cannot be taken away from people. It is their favorite toy, and it will remain so, as Freud said in The Future of an Illusion, it will remain that way as long as we're afraid of death and have no problem, which is, I think, likely to be quite a long time. Second, I hope I've made it clear that I'm perfectly happy for people to have these toys and to play with them at home and hug them to themselves and so on, and share them with other people who come around and play with the toys. So that's absolutely fine. They are not to make me play with these toys. Okay? I will not play with the toys. Don't bring the toys to my house. Don't say, my children must play with these toys. Don't say, my toys might be a condom. Here we go again. Are not allowed by their toys. I'm not going to have any of that. Enough with clerical and religious bullying and intimidation. Is that finally clear? Have I got that across? Thank you.
One of the reasons why I like doing this, some people say sometimes, don't I ever get tired of debating with the religious? No, absolutely I don't, because you never know what they're going to say next. Sam and I don't mind being called predictable. It's very easy. We know what we think. We say straight out where we think we know, and where we think it's not possible to know, why we don't think there's a supernatural, and so on. But this evening already we've had your suggestion that God is only really a guru, a friend when you're in need. I mean, he wouldn't do anything like bugger around with Job to prove a point. And which, if I now tell you, well, that must mean that that book is not the Word of God, you'd say, well, whoever believed that ever was the Word of God? Let me just tell you something. For hundreds and thousands of years, this kind of discussion would have been in most places impossible to have, or Sam and I would have been having it at the risk of our lives. Religion now comes to us in this smiley face, ingratiating way, because it's had to give so much ground, and because we know so much more. But you've no right to forget the way it behaved when it was strong, and when it really did believe that it had God on its side.
Now, why now? Why am I doing this now, people ask? Well, I'll tell you why now, because in the last few years it's become impossible to turn a page of a newspaper without being, as the religious would say, offended. I'm offended that people in this country believe that they have the right to advocate the teaching of garbage to children under the fatuous name of intelligent design. I believe that we're... I thought you'd never clap. Just as I believe that where religion ends, philosophy begins, where alchemy ends, chemistry begins, where astrology ends, astronomy begins, and now the people will say, well, let's give equal time to astrology in the schools. It's nonsense, dangerous and sinister nonsense. The Pope says, AIDS may be bad, but condoms are much worse. What kind of moral teaching is this? And how many people are going to die for such dogma? You see what I mean? So, I'll be very brief. There's an end to this, an end particularly to the cultural cringe that says that if someone can claim to be a religious spokesman, they are entitled to respect. I have to say it in your presence, sir. I think that the title Reverend is something people should be more concerned to live down than to live up to. Thank you. Do I, who've read Freud and know what the future of an illusion really is, and know that religious belief is ineradicable as long as we remain a stupid, poorly evolved mammalian species, think that some Canadian law is going to solve this problem? Please. No, our problem is this: our prefrontal lobes are too small, and our adrenaline glands are too big, and our thumb finger opposition isn't all that it might be. And we're afraid of the dark, and we're afraid to die, and we believe in the truths of holy books that are so stupid and so fabricated that a child can, and all children do, but as you can tell by their questions, actually see
through them. And I think it should be, religion, treated with ridicule and hatred and contempt. And I claim that right.
Now let's take a case of someone who's been dealt a bad hand. What about Fräulein Freisel in Austria, whose father, unwilling to get out of the way, kept her in a dungeon where she didn't see daylight for 24 years and came down most nights to rape and to sodomize her, often in front of the children who were the victims of the previous attacks and offenses. And it's only purely by accident that Herr Freisel is now in custody. And it's a shame that he's 76, because his life imprisonment isn't going to feel enough like that to him. I want you to just take a moment, since we're so interested in the downtrodden and the helpless. Imagine how she must have begged him. Imagine how she must have pleaded. Imagine for how long. Imagine how she must have prayed every day, how she must have beseeched heaven. Imagine, for 24 years, and no answer at all. Nothing. Nothing. Imagine how those children must have felt. Imagine what they felt when they saw one of their number, the dead twin, being borne away from neglect on top of everything else. Now, you say that's all right that she went through that, because she'll get a better deal in another life? I have to ask you, if you can be morally or ethically serious and postulate such a question. No, that had to happen, and heaven did watch it with indifference, because it knows that score will later on be settled. So it was well worth her going through it. She'll have a better time next time. I don't see how you can look anyone in the face, or live with yourself, and say anything so hideously, wickedly immoral as that, or even imply it. There, that's my answer.
Unanswered questions. Amazing. No one, though they were asked repeatedly, would say whether they thought Stephen Fry, my friend, was in a state of mortal sin or not. They wouldn't tell you. Something about the question brought out their inner coward. Well, I say that homosexuality is not just a form of sex, it's a form of love, and it deserves our respect for that reason. That when my children were young, I'd have been proud to have Stephen as their babysitter, and I'd told them they were lucky. And if anyone came to my door as a babysitter wearing holy orders, I'd call first a cab and then the police.
But none of these things apply in the case of Mother Teresa, because it's a simple matter of record that she was a fanatic and a fundamentalist and a fraud. I think probably the most successful confidence trickster of the last century, and responsible for innumerable deaths and for untold suffering and misery, and proud of it. Should I just assert this, or would you require any proof? We know how fair-minded some people can be.
I just learned about John Roger and Charles Keating, for example.
Well,
thank you, John.
there's one way, there are two ways of doing it. One is you say, well, if she was so wonderful, how come she went to Haiti at the invitation of the Duvalier family, took money from them which didn't belong to them, had been stolen from the Haitian poor, said how wonderful the situation was for the poor in Haiti, how the poor loved the Duvaliers and the Duvaliers loved them back. How does she get to Haiti in the first place? She's supposed to be in Calcutta. You've got to get all the way to Haiti to praise a regime that is notorious for its wringing of the poor. Oh, she did it because out of solidarity with people who thought like her, and because she needed their money, which they'd stolen, as she stole hers from Charles Keating of the Lincoln Savings and Loan, who gave her $1.5 million and a private jet in return. Pretty good deal, actually, for an olive crucifix and a blessing when he was on trial. He needed a character witness. The court then wrote to her and said, you've got $1.5 million of the dollars we're looking for that belong to the poor of California. Do you feel like giving it back? She never replied. She'd written to the court in the first. That's just the fraudulence. That's just touching on the fraudulence. But by the way, if any of what I've just said is true, and it all is, how come you need me to tell you? How come that my profession hasn't enlightened you about this already? How come this woman stands underneath a Niagara of undiluted free publicity for all these years?
With every 72 virgins that they get in paradise, they also get 72 mothers-in-law. So perhaps
He's
in the
making
end,
a joke.
perhaps in the end, you're.
It occurs to me as you're both talking that both of you have faced serious illness in your lives, and I'm wondering if that at all has shaped your view of the afterlife. Christopher?
I would say it fractionally increases my contempt for the false consolation element of religion and my dislike for the dictatorial and totalitarian part of it. But I presume what I say by the first is self-evident. But what I mean by the second is it's considered perfectly normal in this society to approach dying people who you don't know, but who are unbelievers, and say, now are you going to change your mind? It's, in fact, it's considered almost a polite question. And as you know, there's a long history of fraud about this. People claim that Darwin had a deathbed recantation. They'd made up lies about Thomas Paine. It goes on all the time. It's a very nasty little history, but there's also a horrible undertone of blackmail to it. People write and say, look, you've got about one chance left now. Aren't you going to take it? I'm writing to you as a friend. They've even tried it on me when I've been very ill and I haven't had quite the vinegar I'd like to have had in a hospital bed. I don't mind, I can take it. But I think there are a lot of people older than myself, iller than myself, perhaps at the risk of seeming conceited, less educated than myself, to whom that's a horrible experience. It's very depressing and alarming to be spoken to in that way. I mean, if Sam and I were to form a core of people to go around religious hospitals, which is what happens in reverse, and say to people who are lying in pain, say, did you say you were Catholic? Yes. Well, look, you may only have a few days left, but you don't have to live them as a serf, you know. Just recognize that that was all bullshit, that the priests have been cheating you. And I guarantee you'll feel better. I don't think that would be very ethical.
Okay, but
I think it would be something of a breach of taste. But if it's in the name of if it's in the name of God, it has a social license. Well, fuck that, is what I say. And will say, if it's my last breath. Thank you.